Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Ullman. I'm the president and CEO of the Mob Museum, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. This is a very special evening for us, a long time in coming, and we're very excited to be sharing it with you. Back in early 2016, I got a phone call one day. It was Oscar Goodman. And Oscar told me about this gentleman, this guy named Frank LaPena, who was interested in working at the Mob Museum. And Oscar told me that he was extremely eager and someone that we should take a look at. He told me also that he was someone that had a difficult past. But Oscar, in his way, said no pressure, just meet with him. And I should say also, just as an aside, we've never at the Mob Museum been deterred, by the notion of hiring somebody who has a criminal record. Or, I think philosophically, our approach has always been that if someone has paid their debt to society, they're entitled to an opportunity to re-enter the workforce. And in some cases, it's not always a debt that was owed. And we met with Frank, and we came to discover that he was indeed an extremely eager, extremely friendly person, and we hired him. And we hired him at first to greet people as they entered the museum, and then eventually, as we got to know him better, he was someone that would engage the guests up here on the second floor and tell them stories. And it has been incredible to have Frank as part of the Mob Museum team. I know that he is someone who is adored by his coworkers. There are many, many coworkers who are watching this tonight on live stream. He's someone that is always leaving an impression on the guests as well. If you look through the reviews of the Mob Museum on TripAdvisor and Yelp, there's probably no other staff member that has been mentioned more. The shout outs to Frank, you have to go see Frank, the docent, the staff member, the guide, all those things. And he's been incredible. But we also, as we came to learn more about Frank and learn more about his story, which is certainly unusual to say the least, we also came to know that as friendly and eager and positive and wonderful as Frank was every day at work, that when he wasn't at work, Frank has been, for years embroiled in this fight to restore his name. And that's what tonight's program's about. I'm not going to spoil the story. They're going to do a much better job of telling it than I ever would anyway. But there are some things that I always think about when I think about Frank and I think about his story. And I think first, often we hear about times where the criminal justice system might have gotten it wrong. And I think often when we hear those stories, we don't really think about people, the people that are behind those stories that are, have been involved in that. And the amount of time, it's almost unfathomable to think about the time that has gone by. And, if there's one thing that we can't get back, it's that. And I think that, when you think about Frank too, it makes you wonder, and I hope you get this after you hear the story, and of some pretty heavy ideas of, what does it mean to be free, and what's it worth to maintain your dignity and to maintain your name? What would you sacrifice to do those things. Frank has sacrificed a lot. So we've learned a lot from Frank, and hope that you all will learn a thing or two tonight as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Shumacher, Frank LaPena, and enjoy. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. You mentioned I'm Jeff Shumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here at the Mob Museum. And welcome, everyone, to our courtroom. And thank you for wearing your masks and observing the distancing that we've set up in the room. Much appreciated. We're fortunate, Frank and I, to be able to be in these sort of newfangled cubicles so that we can take our masks off and not create a problem. So it helps with
it's almost the size of my cell.
And great. So we're going to talk a little bit about Frank's story tonight. Frank's going to do most of the talking, especially after I introduce the story. And I'm looking forward to his responses to my questions, but then later also to any of your questions. And so when we get to the Q&A segment, we'll have a microphone set up over on this side, and one at a time, we'll have you come up and ask a question if you have one. We also are live streaming this event online, so there are people online who are watching and who may also pose a question. And one of our staff members is monitoring those, and so if we have a good question online, that'll be texted to me, and then I will relay it to Frank. So we've got a whole system worked out here, which I'm sure will go sideways at some point, so hopefully not. But so I thought we would start, Frank, by there's some people in the room who probably know this story, and there are others who don't know very much about it at all. So what I thought I would do is start with what happened on January 14th, 1974, or what the public was told that happened on that date. Okay, so I'm going to start there, and then we will go from there. So here's how the story of Hilda Krause's murder was described in the press immediately after it happened. In the early morning of January 14th, 1974, Hilda Krause, 71, was asleep in her condo in the Las Vegas Country Club. Her husband, Marvin, 64, opened the garage to leave for work when two masked men forced him back into the house. Again, keep in mind, this is how it was reported in the press at the time. According to news reports, the elderly couple were tied with electrical cords in separate bedrooms. Marvin was hit in the head with a gun and knocked unconscious. Hilda's throat was slit. Sorry for the graphic nature of this, but this is what happened. Hilda's throat was slit, a ligature was tied around her neck, and she was stabbed in the back with a kitchen knife. The room was full of blood. When Marvin regained consciousness, he managed to get untied and ran to his wife, but she was dead. The assailants had taken some jewelry, a television, and Marvin's Cadillac Eldorado. The slaying of Hilda Krause was a huge news story in Las Vegas and across the country. I have access to a website called newspapers.com, and I searched today to see how far and wide this story was reported across the country. Hundreds of newspapers reported this story on January 15th, 1974. This was a national story. Hilda was very well known in Kentucky, for example, and all the papers in Kentucky reported on it. Marvin was a well-connected slot manager at Caesar's Palace, and Hilda was a wealthy socialite, originally from Kentucky, as I mentioned, and who had a minor ownership stake in Caesar's Palace. So I want to note that the description of the murder in the newspapers at that time did not match precisely with the coroner's more detailed description of how the homicide actually occurred. And we'll get back to that later because that comes into play as this story unfolds. So now we fast forward to 2 months later. The police arrest their first suspect, Gerald Weekland, 26. They later arrest his alleged accomplice, Thomas Boutwell, 27. Weekland is offered an attractive plea deal, and he tells the police that he and Boutwell were hired to commit the murder by Frank LaPena, a Hacienda Hotel Casino bell captain, and his girlfriend, Rosalie Maxwell, a former Caesar's Palace cocktail waitress. The following month, the police arrest LaPena, 36 at the time, and Maxwell, 42, contending they hired Weakland to kill Hilda Krause so that Maxwell could marry Marvin Krause, try to track this, and that she and LaPena then could take advantage of his wealth. So the murder presumably was set up to look like a robbery gone wrong. All right, so...
That never existed.
Say that?
That never existed.
Right. And that was the story that Weakland told.
The state's theory of the case never, ever existed. It was false and it was phony, and it was manufactured by the police and by the prosecutor.
And we're going to come back to that, because what I'd like to do now, Frank, if I could, is just leave you a little suspense there. And let's go back in time to when you were a kid and just discuss you growing up and coming to Las Vegas.
As a kid?
Well, just sort of leading up to this point.
You want me to go to as when I was younger?
Yeah.
All right. I was born in New York in 1938. I was a preemie baby. I was born in 6 months. We moved to California. At the age of 2, I was run over by a car. At the age of 3, there was a polio epidemic in California, and I got caught up in that. I had infantile paralysis. I was put in an iron lung for 1.5 years. Doctors told my mother, he'll never walk again. The doctor said he might not live. My mother told him, you don't know my son. He'll walk. He's a fighter. Well, I walked. She got tired of the doctor. She sent me to Sister Kenny Clinic. And when I went to the Sister Kenny Clinic, she's the one that cured me. Her method of doing polio was different from the doctors. They called her a crack, but she cured more people than any doctor that there ever was. And she actually saved my life, okay? So because of that, as I got older, we went back to Jersey. Moved into a place called Garfield, New Jersey. That's I lived in the hood. Gangs everywhere, mob everywhere. I lived upstairs from the bookie joint. That was run by the Pecora family. Mary Pecora ran the bar and the restaurant, and Richie ran the bookie joint. When I was 14 years old, my old man took off. Now the mob knew who I was, because the old way of Sicily, when a person becomes a made person and they do the blood oath, they become what is known as a soldier. Once you attain that title, you're mandated to take care of the neighborhood. And that's what the mob did. They took care of it. They knew I was a good kid. I didn't do robberies. I didn't do burglaries. I don't beat nobody up. And Babe was a capo. He says, come here, kid. We know about your old man taking off. You need to make a living for your family. You're going to be with me. I'm going to get you a work permit. You're going to work in my bowling alley, and you're going to pump gas in my gas station. So that's where I went. Now, my mother, when she found out I was going to go work with the mob, she took me aside. My family's from Sicily, and they're mafia. And she sat me down and she says, don't you ever ask them for what their business is. You keep your mouth shut. You just listen, and you're going to learn. You're going to get a lot of knowledge from these guys, but do not ever ask them about their business. I says, okay, Mom, no problem. So I went to work for them. What he did was a little unusual. He had the bowling alley. He said, okay. He went out and he got a shoe shine box. And he issued an order. Nobody bowls till the kid shines your shoes. I'm going to charge you for the shoe shine, not him. He's just 14 years old. You're going to pay me. That was my paycheck. My first paycheck was a sealed envelope. Never forget it. Babe had that envelope, my face, and he says, kid, this is your first week's earnings. Now, you're going to take that envelope, You're going to give it to your mother. And then he paused, and he looked at me. I'll never forget that look, because it was a death look. He said, I better not find out she didn't get it. You capiche? I go, yeah, I understand. I never opened up that letter. I never asked my mother what was in it. We did well. Had I tried to find out what it was, I'd be disrespecting him. And that was, I didn't do that. But because of the polio was always in the papers, I played all the sports. I played everything that my body would allow me to play. Okay? Now, my first hero was Rocky Marciano. I met Rocky when I was about in 7th or 8th grade. I was a patrol boy, and he's standing on a corner. I see my hero. and so I went to shake his hand. It was gigantic. This guy's hands were like, you couldn't believe how powerful they were. But he had a gentle shake. His cousin was up the street. He had a sheet metal place, so Rocky went to see him. Grant School No. 1 was across the street, so he came in and he did a speech and this and that, and he was my hero. My second one was Tippy Larkin. Tippy Larkin, Antonio Pelletieri. He was the lightweight, welterweight champion of the world. And he had retired. He was from Garfield, and he was just down the street. And he started a tournament, a boxing tournament, and he took me under his wing, and I had a few fights. But I also had somebody at that same time, Ken Hanselman. I started martial arts at that time. He was about the most dangerous man I ever met in my life. This guy was so dangerous, it was unbelievable. He was the youngest JDI in Marine Corps history at the age of 17. I mean, this guy was brutally powerful. And he taught me some special things, because he said, I'm 17 years old, and I got these big athletes. I got to train. I got to train them in martial arts. And he had started when he was like 3 years old. So he taught me a few things. He taught me something very specific that I learned how to do. And he says, this is what I'm going to teach you, because this is what I did to these guys. And that saved my life. When I went to jail, went to prison, I was put in a nut tank where the criminally insane were. Okay? The detectives, Avance and Lee, put me in there purposely, and along with Mel Harmon. These guys were completely crazy. There was the Wolfman. He would howl all the time. Or the guy thought he had a bird on his shoulder. And the Cuban, his to throw his crap against the wall or eat it, one or the other. He was completely insane. And he got into fights. I'm going to tell you something right now. You can't hurt a crazy person. You can hit them as hard as you want, and they're going to laugh at you. So when that started, I said, okay, all right. I'm going to end this right now. So I threw him on the ground, and I put him to sleep. I'm the only one who knows how to do that. Ken Hanselman taught me how to do this. This is what he did with the big guys. I don't care who you are, how strong you are, how powerful you are. I get you on the ground, your ass belongs to me. I'm gonna put you to sleep, but I'm not gonna hurt you. That was the deal. He put me to sleep many times. Then he showed me how to put him to sleep. That actually saved my life without hurting anybody. And that's how I've survived in a lot of the places when I was in the prison system.
Frank, so let's move forward to coming to Las Vegas, working in the casino industry. Why don't you talk about coming to Las Vegas and what you were doing here?
Oh, yeah, I came here in 1964. I went to work at the El Cortez. That was mob infested. They had Genovese family down there. They had Raymond Patriacca. I personally knew Raymond Patriacca, the crime boss. I dated his niece. Yeah, I dated his niece. I didn't know who he was when I dated her. She asked me one time, you want to meet my uncle? I said, yeah, okay, I'll meet your uncle. I didn't know who he was. So we flew to Boston. We go to Boston, and then when I found out it was Raymond Patriacca, I goes, oh my God, this is the big mob guy, okay? So he said, you kids want to have breakfast with us? I said, yeah, okay. He says, okay, I'll have my crew pick you up and we'll go have breakfast. This is at 2 o'clock in the morning. I go, mano to me, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Who the hell wants to have breakfast at 2 o'clock in the morning? Anyway, 4 cars pull up, loaded to the gills, carrying every one of them. Now, you think you're going to go to an Italian restaurant, right? We went to Chinatown. We go to Chinatown, and this restaurant is just magnificent. It's beautiful. We went in the back, and they had this spread food for everybody. And they all came in carrying. I sat down with the Chinese tongs. Those are the Chinese assassins. And you don't look at them. There's no eye contact. And we no sooner sat down, there's a knock on the door. They just hijacked a lobster truck. Everybody got up, took all the lobsters off. Raymond Patriacca was watching me. And he said to me later on, he says, I was watching you, kid. He says, you know how to handle yourself, don't you? All thing I said to him was, I was raised in the hood. That's all I said to him. He says, I like to come to Vegas once in a while. It's okay if you come and pick me up? I said, sure, anytime you want. I never told anybody what I did. I kept my mouth shut, never said a word. Babe told me that when I was, I don't know, 17, I think, somewhere around there, 16. He pulled me aside when I was working there. He says, look, kid, this is time for us to have a man-to-man talk, okay? Because I'm amongst all the wise guys. He said, I'm going to sit you down, I'm going to give you some education, and I'm going to give you some knowledge, and you listen to what I say and heed every word that I tell you. He says, don't you ever tell anybody what you've done or what you're going to do. You keep your mouth shut. That way nobody knows anything about you. Don't let anybody know what's in that head of yours. You keep quiet. And by golly, don't ever use a name because that'll get you killed. He says, you understand what I'm saying to you? I said, yeah. Okay. That was the biggest thing for me to happen when I was here in Vegas, when I started doing special favors for the mob. I did a very specific type of a special favor. They came to see me, they wanted to talk to me about it. When I was at Caesars, one of the wise guys from Philadelphia came in, took a liking to me. At that time, mob families were coming in. Everybody's getting a territory here. And this one guy liked me. And he asked me one time, he says, you've been here a while, Frank? I said, yeah. He said, we want to know if we can ask you if you can do us a specific type of favor for the family business. I said, okay. When I heard the word family business, I knew that was dangerous. I knew I can get killed. He said, we're going to tell you what it is. Let me know if you can do it. I said, okay. So he told me what it was. He said, can you do that? I said, yeah, I can do that. I said, as a matter of fact, nobody will ever find out about it. No one will ever know anything. You guys will always be safe because I'll never do it the same way twice. No names will ever be used. And you take care of your business. And I did it for quite a few years, and they took damn good care of me. And they trusted me. When this thing happened, I thought there was going to be a war here because they were hot. They wanted to know who did it. And I said, I'll handle this myself. I don't know who did it. I have no idea who this people. I don't even know these people. I came to find out years later when I'm dating Rosalie, she's got a sugar daddy who's mob connected. She's telling him all about me, never tells me anything about him. He saw my picture in her bedroom. He says, who's that? And she tells him who I am. He took the picture, threw it across the thing. He says, I'll get that guinea. I'm going to get him. And this is what started this stuff right here. The next thing I knew, I'm in the black book. I go to work. I'm in the black book. How the hell did I get in the black book? I didn't do anything.
So let's jump back to 1974. Hilda Krause has been murdered. It's a big story in the news. You find yourself implicated in the murder, and you're facing possibly the death penalty. I mean, what were you thinking at the time? I was
in shock. I was in total, complete shock. I was, what the hell what am I being charged for? I don't even know these people. I hired Oscar Goodman.
Well, you were really doing well in Vegas at that time too, right? You had a job,
Oh, listen, I had a great job. I had a boat, I had a house, I had a great job. Life was good. I had my animals. The world was fantastic. Then the next thing, just like that, cuffs on me.
So
taking me downtown.
So the next big case, the first big thing in the case is this preliminary hearing, and you were getting to that.
Yeah. We're going to the preliminary hearing. I got Oscar.
This is a young Oscar Goodman. He's starting to take mob cases and different kinds of defense cases, and
Yeah.
he's your attorney.
Well, the prosecutor knew how great Oscar Goodman was, so he decided to hide a lot of evidence that I found out years later. Okay? Had Oscar known what he concealed, he would have destroyed him completely. We've made 3 statements. We never knew about it. The very day that Weekland made his statement, when he said that Marvin Krause, the husband, hired me to kill his wife, Hilda Krause, from the moment he said that, I was innocent of that. I was innocent of that crime. I had nothing to do with it. And they concealed it. They said, you cannot get a plea bargain by naming this guy. So he gives another name. Again. Doesn't mention my name. Somebody else. No, you can't have a plea bargain by naming this other person. Well, how about Frank LaPena? Quote, that's the name we want. That's the name we want. Now, they're targeting me. Come to find out, Marvin Krause is very, very, very close friends and socializes with Ralph Lamb. He's got the juice, and he's using that juice. He's using that juice to put me away and get me executed. I didn't know it at the time. I had no knowledge of this. I didn't even know who the hell this guy was.
Well, and just an aside, I mean, one of the homicide detectives on this case, Beecher A. Vance, said later that they dismissed the idea that Marvin Krause was involved almost from the beginning. But in almost every homicide case like this, the spouse is almost always the first suspect, right?
The first one. But he's being protected.
Yeah.
And Marvin and Beecher A. Vance is protecting him completely. Yeah. I don't know any of this that was going on here. I'm in the dark. Okay? I don't know this guy. I don't know anything about his wife. I didn't know where they lived. I didn't know anything about him. And that's when, during the preliminary hearing, Rosalie blurts out, when we were having a recess, that Marvin Krause hated me. He's the one that put me in the black book. He's the one that had me 86 at Caesars. I didn't know that. And he said he was going to go get me. So he used what juice that he did have. And this was a total, complete frame-up.
Yeah. So before we
like I said,
go ahead.
The theory of the case in which Rosalie was supposed to hire Weekland to kill her, and then she's going to marry him, and then I'm supposed to kill Krause. That never existed. Rosalie never, ever divorced her husband. She said, I'll never divorce my husband. That theory was false, and it was a fake. And they got away with it for a lot of years.
Right. So ultimately, the court, even after the preliminary hearing, the good news of the preliminary hearing was Oscar helped you eliminate the death penalty from the situation.
Oh,
right?
his presentation before Judge Carl Christian was incredible. I mean, this man was brilliant beyond words. But I'll tell you what, I sat there and I listened to how I was going to be executed
Yeah.
and what those pellets do to you and how they tear your insides out and your skin turns purple and you bleed from the eyes, the nose, the mouth. It's an agonizing death. In this floor where we have that
Gas chamber chair.
gas chamber, I was there that night when Jesse Bishop was executed, 1979. I was the senior law clerk at that time, and I was the only one allowed to go up the death row. And his family wanted his body, so I did a limited power of attorney for them to take his body at the mortuary and send it. They were taking it back to California to be buried. So I was in that gas chamber when he was executed.
So ultimately, the court determines that there's sufficient evidence for you and Rosalie to stand trial. Rosalie's trial comes first in 1976, and she is acquitted after Weekland changes his story and testifies that neither of you had anything to do with the murder.
That's right.
So before he's telling the story about this whole concocted story, then he changes his story. And she is acquitted.
She had great lawyers. I mean, she had the top of the line. I had buffoons. That's what I had. She had tremendous lawyers. She had Leonard Gang, who was a former judge, and Don Wood. He used to be a prosecutor in Nebraska, and he never lost a murder trial. If you read the transcript on what they did and how they took down the state like you could not believe. They made Abe Vance and Chuck Lee, the jury said, those guys are liars. They tore them apart.
So a year later, roughly, your trial comes up, and you have different representation. It's essentially the same story.
Exactly.
But you're convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
So what was the difference between those two trials?
The difference is there on the death penalty, you have a date to die.
No, I mean, what was the difference between Rosalie's trial and your trial?
Oh, the difference was you had the great attorneys. I had horrible attorneys. They stayed away from everything that Leonard Gang told Harry Reid, you follow what we do, Frank's going to be acquitted. Well, he did everything the opposite, the complete opposite. He has me go to trial in jail clothes. I almost got into a fist fight with him.
Why did he do that? Do you know?
Well, I was trying to fight. He said, "Oh no, the jury won't pay no attention to it." I said, "What are you, stupid?" I says, "They're going to look at me and say, look, he's guilty, and he does the worst thing you can possibly ever do. When I'm testifying, he never ever asked me. This is a cardinal sin. Did you hire Gerald Weekland to do this killing? He never asked me that. The news media destroyed me. LaPena doesn't deny he hired Weekland to kill them. I think they destroyed me. Leonard Gang told me Reid purposely did that, and he got you convicted by doing that. He was not supposed to do that, and he knew damn well he wasn't supposed to do that. He was not a criminal lawyer. He didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground about criminal law. And he gets his partner is a civil attorney who's never done a murder case. Mel Harmon ran over these guys like a locomotive train.
Mel Harmon was the prosecutor.
Mel Harmon was supposed to be the best prosecutor in the state of Nevada. To me, he's a cheater, you know. I nicknamed him Napoleon Bonaparte. That's the name I gave him. Yeah.
So let's keep moving because there's a lot of points, there's a lot of things going on in this case.
All right.
So at this point, you've resolved. I mean, you believe you're innocent.
I know I'm innocent.
You know you're innocent, and you've been unjustly convicted, and it's time to start figuring out how to appeal, how to deal with this moving forward. How did you get started involved with the law?
Well, I went to prison. They always put me in a max prison. They always put me there. They had a paralegal program. So I enrolled in it, and I passed with a A+, and I took the law like a duck takes the water. God gave me that gift. And I start winning cases left and right. But I was smart. I talked a lot of times to the old-timers that weren't allowed in the prison law library. And I got a lot of information from them. I got a lot of knowledge from them. I always talked to them. And then I had my first murder case was Curly Robbins. I overturned his murder conviction on a jury instruction. I got another guy, his appeal reinstated, first time ever in the state of Nevada. His appeal was never filed by his attorney, and 6 years later, I got him back into court. Supreme Court made a decision on that. Got him back in there. Once I did that, the guys on the yard said, whoa, wait a minute. We got somebody here who fights for us. And I start winning cases left and right. And a lot of them say, well, how the hell does he get that information that he can do this kind of work? Well, I had a connection with Michael Grubb from the Institute of Criminalistic Laboratory in California. He was a serologist. I would read the case, send him what I have. He'd come back with an affidavit, get him court appointed 35 times, and we'd win the case. But my mentor was Tom Perkins. He was a public defender, and he would come in and tutor me. He's now a judge. And he told me something that I never, ever forgot. It was the best thing a man ever told me. He says, look, it's not about guilt or innocent. It's about who walks into that courtroom best prepared is going to walk out the winner. Now, you remember that. He says, now I'm going to teach you how to write some law. He said, you're raw right now, but I'm going to give you as much knowledge as I can. And this, I start winning cases left and right, left and right. It got to the point that I was winning so many of them. The Attorney General took me before federal Judge Edward Reed, saying I was practicing law without a license. Well, the Supreme Court says, hey, you're allowed to assist. So I never used that I represent anybody. Yeah. But I had this anger to go against these people. I had a lot of anger.
So in 1982, so we keep moving forward, the Nevada Supreme Court reverses your verdict and orders a new trial.
They didn't let Weakland reap the benefits of the plea bargain, so his testimony was induced for cooperation.
Can you explain that just a little further?
Well, in other words, we're not going to let you get your plea complete to go before the judge and say, okay, take your plea, this is your sentence. They held it over his head.
In other words, we're not going to give you the plea bargain until you do this testimony.
Absolutely.
And you can't do that, or you couldn't do that.
You can't do that. Can't do that. And the Supreme Court says you can't do that. That's illegal. So I got reversed on that.
You reversed. You're free for 6 years, pending the second trial.
Right.
What did you do during that time?
I did most of my law work while I was out on the street. Rosalie put up her house to get me out. I went, because of the position I was in, I worked for a law firm, Colucci, Minnigill. I met this fabulous Zoe. She was the manager, and she helped me out a lot around the office, and helped me a lot of things I didn't know about, because when I came out, I was in a new world. The world changed. I'm whoo, what? I don't know about this, I don't know about that, I didn't know about computers. And so it took me, and she helped me out. So I think one of the funniest things was, I'll never forget that. When I came out the last time, and the world had changed again, and that's when I got my parole, my pardon. Took them chains off, and I did a freedom walk. I'm going down the street, looking at buildings, I'm looking at cars, I'm looking at all kinds. I'm free. Who comes up the street in their car? Zoe. She pulls up and goes, I found him, Carmine. She's got a little thing in her hand. I don't even know what the hell it is, and she's talking to it. I'm going, what's that? That's a cell phone. That's a telephone? I'm shocked. Anyway, they next day, I go back there next day, they said, we're going to get you a cell phone. So I'm afraid of it because it's a gadget. I don't know what it is. And Zoe says, now, Frank, you're going to do a voicemail and talk into it, okay? So if somebody that calls you and you don't answer it, you're going to have to. So she says, say something. What I said was, what in the hell did they think of next? And that's when you called me. If I didn't answer, that's what it was. Then she takes me. It was funny. She says, okay, we're going to go get something to eat. I'm going to get you some food. Carmen got me an apartment. So Zoe takes me and he says, what do you want? I said, I just want fruit. That's all I want, fruit. We go to the check stand. I'm going for cash, right? She takes out this card. Goes like that. I said, what the hell are you doing? You need cash. She says, no, Frank. This is cut a card. I just go like this, and they take my money out of the bank. I said, they can't do that. That's illegal. I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
So I had to learn everything all over. I mean, life was actually terrifying.
I bet.
It really was. I mean, you walk out there and time passes you by and everything's new and the world has changed and you're back into the dark ages.
Now, going back to the dark ages for a minute, by which I mean before cell phones, there's a second trial in 1989, and you're convicted again.
Convicted again.
What happened the second time? Basically the
Same thing as the first trial.
Yeah.
They didn't challenge the theory of the case. Rosalie had told the attorney, Mills, she says, hey, I never sought a divorce. I never would seek a divorce. And because of that, when I was going with her, I had stopped going with Rosalie. I broke it off. I said, I can't go down this road no more. Because she said, I'll never divorce my husband because of the benefits I get from him working at the test site. That was her thinking.
Yeah.
So the state's theory that she's going to marry Marvin Krause and kill Hilda Krause was ridiculous.
And didn't Weekland change his testimony again?
He changed his testimony. He said, I did not do it. He says, I gave false, all my statements were false. My testimony was false. And he said at Rosalies Trial, this lady had nothing to do with this crime. But I know why he said that. I learned years later why he did that. Tony Spilotro made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And I got that evidence. Spilotro was involved in my case.
That's very fresh. That's pretty new information.
That
right?
was new information, but I got the evidence to prove it.
Let's keep moving through here. So 1991, the Nevada Supreme Court affirms your second conviction. But a few years later, you're back in court. Clark
I'm always
County
back in court.
District Judge Gene Porter, he's looking at this new evidence that you've come up with, and he says you had ineffective counsel. He then warrants a third trial. He thinks you should go back for a third trial, but the Supreme Court says no. So you had to go back to prison.
Yeah, I was out again for a year and a half, and when in a split decision, they brought me back, and that was hard. You know, I'm out 3 times, and 3 times I go back because of a ruling. Now, the last time I was in Arizona, I was right next to the Mexican border. I could have walked right across there, and they couldn't do a damn thing with you. But I didn't. I turned myself in. I knew one day I'd be able to be vindicated from all of this. So I trusted the legal system, even though it went on a lot of deaf ears, and it went on and some good ones, you know. Listen, you can knock me down and think you won the fight. Huh? Forget about it. I'll bounce right back up and I'll fight you to the end. And I will never give up. I'll never quit. And I'll keep on going and keep on going until I win. And the state of Nevada knocked me down so many times, but I bounced right back out, and we fought another day.
So
I was driving them crazy.
I'm sure. So at this point, and there's a lot of complicated legal things that we could get into, but basically the action shifts to the State Pardons Board. So in 2003, the Pardons Board grants you clemency, which is really changing your sentence from life without the possibility of parole to life with the possibility of parole.
Right.
What changed there? What happened there?
It was Justice Gunderson.
Yeah.
I think it was the first time in the history of the United States that a former Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court came forward on a prisoner and gave testimony that he was innocent.
Why did he do
When
that?
Weakland said, Marvin Krause is the one who hired me, Mel Harmon concealed that for 11 years. Okay. And then when he said, the second person had hired me to do this, and they said, no, can't do that. So Gunderson said, Adelaire Guy was the prosecutor. He was the first prosecutor assigned to our case. And when Weakland said that, Guy refused prosecution based on what Weakland said. And then they got Mel Harmon to come in, and Mel concealed it. We never knew about it until 1985, when Justice Gunderson revealed what Judge Guy had told him about the 3 statements, which were extremely exculpatory, showing somebody else was the one who was involved in a crime. I wasn't involved in nothing.
So just to explain this, so it isn't clear, a former Supreme Court Justice of the Nevada Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Nevada Supreme Court, speaks before the Pardons Board and explains this and explains your innocence in this case.
That's what he did.
And it was convincing, and they granted you clemency.
Yeah. Trying to think of his name right now. Jeez, I can't think. Mark Gibbons, Justice Mark Gibbons.
Yeah.
He's the one, when he heard that, he says, I'm going to move for clemency.
And that's, you're granted parole, released on parole in 2005.
That was in 2003 that I got out, which took me another year.
And you discovered cell phones.
The recent one is based on Justice Abby Silver.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So released on parole in 2005, you discover cell phones and credit cards. Altogether, you served 23 years in prison.
5 months, 15 days.
Oh my God. How does that make you feel? I mean, it cannot be good, but I mean,
Well,
also you got your freedom
You
finally.
know, there's no words for that.
Yeah.
There's no words for that. You have no idea what kind of trauma that is, what it does to your mind. I mean, it's pure torture. It's absolutely torture. You know, 2 days before the recent Pardons Board, okay, Justice Abby Silver sponsors me. Now, I went before her court, I did a DNA petition, and it took 5 years for her to make that decision. But the DNA impeached Weakland how he claimed how he killed Hilda Krause. It impeached it. And I had a strong feeling she believed that I was innocent. And she's helping me, you know. And so she didn't want to deny it, but she did. She felt constrained to it because she thought that no one else was involved in the case, but she didn't know about the three statements. If she'd known about the 3 statements, she would have granted me that. Okay? So she puts me on the Pardons Board 2 days before that Pardons Board. I'm in my man cave. This is what I find. 45 years of governmental misconduct of a frame-up. This tells you Mel Harmon had it, the state knew about it, my trial attorneys knew about this. This is an autopsy report, and it tells you who committed the crime. It tells you who committed the crime, and it wasn't Weakland. It was a left-handed killer, and Weakland's right-handed. And they framed me for all that time. So when I sat in my chair in my man cave, which is a small man cave, and I got my little cat, okay? My little Sheba, I love her. I've had her 15 years. And I found that. Right away, I had a flash. Every year, every month, every week, every day, every hour, every minute, and every second that these guys framed me flashed through my head how corrupt they were. And it took me down that they were that evil, that corrupt. All this time, they knew who did this crime. So, anyway.
So just to finish the chronology.
Yes.
So last year, you go back to the pardons board, and what happens?
Well, I got a great attorney now. I got somebody who knows what the hell they're doing. Okay. So Christina Wildeville, she was court appointed by Abby Silver to represent me. We go before the pardon board, and she presents evidence of innocence. And Justice Mark Gibbons, when he listened to her, he says, yeah. And Jonathan Kirschbaum, a very special friend of mine, gave testimony of innocence. You know, the thing, I'm sitting there, and this is the first time in 45 years, and I'm actually listening to testimony on my behalf. That's great. Yeah. Exculpatory, showing innocence. And Chief Justice Mark Gibbons says, yeah, this is an actual case of actual innocence. So I was granted a pardon.
Granted a pardon after 45 years.
After 45 years.
What did you tell the press?
The pardon is based on actual innocence.
Yeah. And what did you tell the press when...
I'm going to Disneyland. He says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to Disneyland. I can go anywhere I want now. Nobody can tell me nothing. I don't have to report nobody. I don't have to say nothing. Get in my car. My wife will let me go.
That's the only person you had to get permission from.
That's the boss lady.
So at this point, you mentioned Jonathan Kirschbaum. At this point, I'd like to ask Jonathan himself, who's in the audience, to come up and talk about your case just a little bit more. Jonathan is a federal public defender.
He's a very special friend.
He's a special friend of Frank's. He's been involved with Frank's case for a number of years. And one of the really interesting aspects of the work has been trying to figure out, like, what actually happened, what really happened to Hilda Krause, and who was involved. Well, can you talk a little bit about that?
All right. So I came onto the case very late, over 40 years after this crime happened. And so when we were appointed to the case, we put together a really great team, worked with another attorney named Jeremy, brilliant attorney, investigator named Tammy, who is just probably one of the best investigators in this country, if not the world, amazing paralegal named Leanna, and we just dug deep into this case. And, you know, we went down lots of rabbit holes because after 40 years, there were just a lot of places to go. But in the end, you know, we kept circling back to two questions. One, what in the hell actually happened here? Because the evidence shows that there was some really strange things that actually happened here. And the other really amazing and just totally confounding aspect of this case is that we have Weakland, who was clearly at the scene of the crime and confessed to the murder, but the evidence shows that he wasn't the killer. And that is just as clear as it can get from the evidence. And Frank mentioned part of that, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about why we know that Weakland wasn't the killer. So Weakland said that this is how he committed the crime, that Hilda was lying on her stomach on the ground. He hit her on top of the head, knocked her out. Then he pulled up her head, slashed her throat, and then took the knife. And sorry if this is a little too gruesome, but as Jeff said before, it is a murder case. So, and then stabbed her in the back, and stabbed her so hard in the back that it went through her lung, and he snapped the handle off the knife. So that's what Weakland said. But that may be consistent with what the newspapers may have said about what happened, but that's not consistent with what actually happened. And we know that from the coroner's testimony. And the coroner said that this is how Hilda was actually killed, is that first there was a ligature around her neck, and somebody tried to strangle her with the ligature. When Weakland was asked about that, he said, no, I never did anything like that. So, of course, that's just the first strike. But after she was strangled with the ligature, then somebody slashed her throat. So Weakland may have been right about that. But that's not actually how she died. And this is actually where it gets kind of gruesome, is that the coroner said that this is actually how she died, is that the killer took a knife and stabbed Hilda's neck through the open wound, and stabbed it very, very forcefully, such that they cut arteries in the back of her neck, and they struck her so forcefully with the knife that it broke bones in her spine. So we think that that's probably when the handle snapped off the knife, because of the force that was used to actually break the bones in Hilda's neck. So that's how she actually died. And then the killer then didn't actually stab her in the back. He just kind of stuck her in the back, and the knife was kind of sticking out at a weird angle, but it was a superficial wound. She wasn't actually stabbed in the back. So when you put it all together, Weakland's explanation as to what happened, he denied that he strangled her, he denied that he stabbed her in the neck. Frank mentioned it, and I won't go into too many details because I know Frank wants to have some surprises in his book. But Weakland was right-handed, and there's evidence in the case to show that the killer was left-handed. And the way that Weakland describes the murder, you just have to come to the conclusion that he just really had no idea what actually happened. So he got this great deal because he was the fall guy here. And right after the crime happened, he was out, and they learned about the crime. They learned about Hilda's murder that morning. Weakland immediately started saying to his associates, "I've been set up. I was set up," and he denied that he killed Hilda. And here's for me, always game, set, match when it came to why Weakland was not the killer, is that he had no blood on him. When he left that house, he had no blood on him. And if the coroner said that she was murdered by slicing of the arteries, and we know there was blood all over the bedroom, there was actually blood all over the knife handle, there was blood on Hilda's arm, because we believe that when she was being strangled, she was probably fighting it, and her right arm was up. There was blood all over her right arm. So the killer had to have blood on him, and Weakland did not have blood on him. And there was no blood in the getaway car, no blood. So it was pretty clear to us that Weakland was not the murderer. And then Frank talks about how diligent he was with all of his litigation, and he was. And Frank has been the driving force behind getting him to where he is today. I mean, he fought so hard in his case. It's just amazing the work that he's done. And one of the things that he did do was this DNA petition. And one of the things that came out of the DNA petition is that the cord that was found by Hilda's body that was presumably used to strangle her, so it was originally the cord that was used to tie up her hands. But when they found her hands were untied, and once again, Weakland said that, no, I didn't untie her hands, so he was wrong about that as well. But the killer then untied her hands, and that's what he used the cord to strangle her. And what Frank uncovered with his DNA petition is that there was an unknown male DNA profile found on that cord. And we believe that was probably the killer's, but 40 years now, it's just, I don't know if we can take that DNA and find out who it actually was, which is too bad. But then that opens up all of these questions. So if Weekland wasn't the killer, what actually happened here? Now, we know, Frank said earlier, that it was a left-handed killer, but unfortunately we weren't able to come up with a population of people that could have been the killers, but we were able to dig up some things about who may have actually been in on this conspiracy. Because as Frank said, the theory that the state put forward was just preposterous, and it didn't make any sense. And as Jeff mentioned before, the husband is usually involved when it's these murder for hires. And there was lots of evidence in the record to support the theory that Marvin was involved here. And probably the most important evidence was a statement that Boatwell, we actually debated how to pronounce this guy's name, Bootwell. We decided it was Boatwell, but besides the point. So when Boatwell testifies at trial, he points the finger at Marvin. He says, when we show up, Marvin acted as if he knew what was going on. He had to have told the police that, but of course, as we were talking about before, Marvin was connected, red flags be damned, he's just not a suspect. But Boatwell thought he was in on it. And then when Marvin gave his statement to the police about what happened, he described the attackers as two Mexicans wearing long coats. Of course, Weekland and Boatwell are not Mexicans, and they actually weren't wearing long coats either. So that statement suggests that Marvin was actually trying to get the police off the scent of who was actually there. So we actually think that, as Frank has been fighting and shouting about for years, that Marvin was involved here. But Marvin was kind of a deadbeat. He did have a nice job at Caesars, but we think Hilda, who actually was the brains of the operation, she got him that job at Caesars. So Marvin couldn't plan this on his own. And then this is actually where it goes off in a really, what we found to be an interesting direction, is that one of the other conspirators, that we believe was one of the other conspirators, was this guy named Joey Costanza. So Joey Costanza knew about this crime and knew the intimate details about this crime weeks and weeks before it happened. And we know that because he was actually the one who ratted out Weekland. So they learned that Costanza and Weekland were connected. And Weekland actually was Costanza's muscle. Costanza was a loan shark. Weekland was the muscle. So Costanza and Weekland, they talked about this 6 weeks before the crime happened. And it's pretty clear, based on his knowledge of what was going to happen here, that Costanza was in on it. So, and we also know that Costanza was in on it because Boatwell believed that Costanza was in on it. And that's because Weekland kept talking about Costanza as if he was one of the co-conspirators. So, to me, it's just amazing. And I thought about this today as I was putting together these thoughts, is Boatwell, the person who was there with Weekland, pointed the finger at both Marvin and this guy named Joey Costanza as being in on it, and the police did nothing about that. So let me talk more about Joey Costanza, because this is actually a really interesting element here. So Joey Costanza was a loan shark, okay? But he also had connections to the mob. So Joey Costanza was from a family called the Costanzas. He had a couple of brothers. And one of Joey Costanza's brothers, Nick, was a member of the Hole in the Wall gang. And the Hole in the Wall gang was obviously Tony Spilatro's gang. And Spilatro was actually known to conduct business out of the Costanza's pizza place. And another funny thing is that when Weekland when the police were putting heat on Weekland to confess the crime, Weekland then would go running to the Costanzas, and they oftentimes followed him to the Costanza's pizza place. So it's clear that Weekland was connected to the Costanzas. And Metro actually kept a confidential file on the Costanzas, concerning their connections to organized crime. So the Costanzas had this connection to the mafia. At the time, this was, the context is also important. So Hilda was a powerful woman. She was a very successful woman. She owned parts of Caesars. And at the time, there was actually a fight over the control of Caesars. And there was a pattern of attacks against, I think it was some of the part owners, but some of the executives at Caesars. So this could have been part of that pattern. And so when we put it all together, we kind of put it together. Oh, and one other aspect about Costanza is that when Frank and his legal team found out about Costanza, then they made this big effort to try and get Costanza to come to court because they wanted to obviously find out more about what he knew. So the DA's office, Mel Harmon, who was dirty, a very dirty prosecutor, he sends Chuck Lee, and we've talked about Chuck Lee before, sends him to New Jersey to try and track down Costanza. They find Costanza, and they try to talk to him about coming back to Nevada, and Costanza refuses. He says, no, I can't go back to Nevada. My life is on the line. I'm in danger. And they're like, are you afraid of Frank? And he's like, I don't know who Frank LaPena is. I wouldn't know him if you introduced me to him. No, I'm afraid of somebody else. And we think that was probably the more dangerous members of this conspiracy, probably somebody connected to Spilotro. And, for these types of burglaries, this was, a street-level burglary, somebody just breaking into somebody's house here. At that time, the hole-in-the-wall gang ran the streets. And there's no way, especially somebody's connected as Joey Costanza, there's no way that they would do this type of crime without getting approval from Spilotro first, or at least having some type of letting Spilotro in on it. So we think that you had Marvin, who had the motive, you had Costanza, who had the connections, you had Hilda, who had some power, and it's just, you put those elements together, and it's pretty clear what this conspiracy actually was, and Weakland was just the patsy. They sent Weakland in, and maybe somebody else came in afterwards. That part is just too crazy to even try and piece together, but that's just what the evidence shows. And one thing that we were certain of from the beginning, from when we met Frank, is that he had no part in this. And this was a 45-year ordeal, as Frank was talking about with his rage, where the evidence just pointed in every other direction and not towards Frank. And it's just, it's a happy ending now that he got his pardons.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's really actually makes me want to continue your investigation and see what else we can find out about this case.
But we're not through yet.
You're not through yet. I understand. But maybe we can.
I got work for him.
Maybe we can dig out some of these mob guys and see if we can find out. I want to end with before we get to some questions, on a couple of positive notes. And I think there's a couple of nice stories, real short stories that we can tell that sort of show the humanity of people. And the first one is about Gerald Weakland's granddaughter. Can you talk about that, Frank?
Shannon Mateo, yeah. She showed up at my my house one day, just out of the blue, and wanted to talk to me. And I said, well, come on in. We sat down and talked. She says, I just wanted to tell you, I'm Jerry Weakland's granddaughter, and I've always wanted to talk to you. I know what he did to you, but he was always good to me. He was a good grandfather. I said, well, I'm glad that he treated you well. I said, but what he did to me was something else. He says, yeah, but I just wanted to see you and talk to you and just let you know that. So I did that. Now, there are two things I want to talk about when I was in there, okay? I had 3 cases that were personal to me, very personal. One was saving a little girl's life. I actually saved her life doing legal work. Barney Everson he was a straight-up convict, and he was in a hole. His daughter needed life-saving surgery. And the doctors wanted to have the okay from one of the parents because the mother wouldn't let him do it. So I went back there, and this tough guy is crying about his little baby girl. I said, just relax. I'll take care of this for you. Okay? I says, you have parents in town? He goes, yeah. I says, I'll be right back. Well, I really didn't know what I was going to do. Honest to God, I had no idea what I was going to do. So I went back to the law library. And I sat down, and I actually prayed to God to help me find a way to do this. Just like that. Boom. Hit me like I did a limited power of attorney, giving the father in place instead of of Marty. Pat Harbour was a school teacher. He was a notary public. I said, Pat, come with me. We went back there, signed it up. He left the prison, went into town. That little girl was operated on that morning. Now, that night, I was called down to the warden's office, and Warden True was there, and Pat was there, and he came up to me and shook my hand. He says, what you did convinced us more than ever that you never committed the crime that you did, Frank. Killers don't have a conscience. They don't go around saving lives. He says, you got a conscience. He says, that little girl's alive because of you. So I went back to my cell, and I sat down, and I'm going, wow, now I know what a surgeon feels like when he saves a person's life for the first time. It's indescribable. So that was the first one. The other one was Richard Hinger. I'd known Richard. He had 4 life sentences, running bow-legged. He was actually the victim of a crime. He was home, and these guys broke down and busted into his door with guns to kill him because they thought he had stolen some guns. They tried to kill Richard, and they ended up being killed, but he don't know what to do. He's never been in trouble in his life. So the girl he's with, she says, well, I'm on probation. Don't call the police, because that's what he wanted to do. So he calls this guy, and the guy comes over and says, well, why don't we just bury the bodies? That's what they did. They buried the bodies, and that's what got him convicted. Now, I met him when I had come back to prison again, before I had met him. And I'm reading this, and Sally Lahr, the judge, told me, he said, if you had only called the police, you wouldn't be here. So she made a factual determination on the evidence. That's what I used. And I did his petition. I said, they're going to deny it. Don't worry about it. I said, you got a little bit about a procedural problem here, but the Supreme Court's going to rule. They'll make a ruling on the merits, and that'll kill the procedural bar under Nuneker. And that's what happened. He goes to federal court, and he gets Franny Forsman, and she got him out. The other one was very, very personal to me. That was the Sandy Shaw case. She was just a kid. She was just a baby, 15 years old. This guy, Cotton Kelly, from Canada, he was a sexual predator. Wouldn't leave her alone, wanted her to post pictures for him and so forth. So she's a kid. So she tells her boyfriend, beat him up. Well, he don't beat him up. He kills him. So the thing was, Dan Seaton, during his argument in the courtroom, said Sandy took the gun, shot him right in the eye. Gave it to Troy Kell, the killer. She had no idea that this was going to happen. None. They went out into the desert. She had to go to the bathroom. She does, and she goes to an area. And this guy, Merrick, who was with him, he follows her, and she's with him. And all of a sudden they hear pop, 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 pop. So Troy Kell kills her. She gets charged. It's called the show and tell murders. So the idiot she has for an attorney doesn't get any kind of evidence, to corroborate. She says, "No, I didn't touch the gun. I never shot him." When I took her case, I contacted Troy Kell. I got an affidavit from him. She had no knowledge that he had a gun. She never touched that gun. She never shot that gun. She had no idea he was going to do this. Then I found a plea agreement from this guy Merrick, and he took a polygraph, and he didn't get charged with the murder. And he's telling the judge, Sandy never touched that weapon. She had no idea that this was going to happen. And Dan Seaton concealed that hearing. I found it when I went through the archives. I put it in for her. That poor kid did 20 years for a crime she never committed. And I know her mother, Connie, well, she's passed now. So that was one case that just bothered me for many, many, many years. And I still talk to her. So I recently typed up her DNA petition. And I intend to put it in there and file it for her. And I'm going to ask the court to do a DNA test, touch DNA, to prove she never touched that weapon. I prove that, she'll be exonerated if she gets a decent, good judge.
I just think these stories that you tell, Frank, tell me that as you've described just how horrible being in prison was and absolutely was.
It's a
but
nightmare.
You gave it. You had a purpose there. I mean, you were helping other inmates. You were helping other people in a way that other people couldn't do. That's amazing. Amazing to know.
Well, I say, Jesus gave me that gift.
Yeah.
And some of my best friends, I knew Audie Murphy. That's right, I knew Audie Murphy. Well, when I was a kid, my family, I got heroes, war heroes. And when I was a young man, I remember in Iwo Jima when the flag was being raised. That was a big thing for me. And I said, I'm gonna serve my country. Nobody's gonna stop me. I didn't have to join because I had the polio. I was completely exempt. Marine Corps wouldn't take me because of that, but the Army did, and I joined and I served my country. I kneel for the cross, but I stand for that flag. When I see how many of those guys gave their life for that flag, and if you don't stand for that flag, as far as I'm concerned, you're a freaking coward. That's the way I feel.
Sure. Sure. We need to stop and get to some questions, but I want to give Jonathan the last word because there's another really nice story that you tell about this incredible struggle that Frank went through. He's now free, and tell him about his 80th birthday party. Is that right?
Yeah, so I guess this was a couple years ago, and so Frank invited the whole team to his birthday party, and we went and we brought our kids, and so it was a packed house at Frank's house. It was his family and friends, and for somebody who turned 80 years old, I mean, I just hope that when I turn 80, there's that many people that still care about me, but it goes beyond that because Frank has lived this life. 23 years in prison, unjustified conviction, had to go through the pardons board to get out, was able to get out, was able to then put together a happy life, and then have this celebration at age 80 where he came out the other side. I mean, he had he went through these horrible experiences, but he was able to celebrate his 80th birthday with friends and family where there was just so many people there that were just so happy to be able to share that experience with him. And for me, it was an extremely meaningful experience. I mean, I usually don't socialize with any of my clients, but Frank's different. Frank's a friend, and to be able to see him at age 80 with that many friends and family after what he's been through, it was magical.
Absolutely.
Well, that's how I met my wife. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, why don't you tell that very quickly, and then we'll take some questions. I've got a couple.
right.
The questions are starting to pile up. Go ahead.
Yeah, my best friend, I met him like in 1983 when I got out and looking for work and so forth. So it was Rosalie, Lynn Brady, and we went to the convention center, to find work when the conventions were there. So we were working over there. So I get assigned to this guy, Tommy Thompson. And he immediately sees my name. He says, I know who you are. he says, as far as I'm concerned, you got a raw deal. I said, oh, thank you. He says, oh, come on, you're going to be with me. So, I just got out and I don't know anything. So Tommy says, okay, we got this set up to do over here, okay? And he says, you got any tools? I go, no. He says, you know how to read a blueprint? I says, no. He said, did you bring any lunch? I said, no. He says, okay, here's a screwdriver. Walk around like you're doing something, and I've got your back. And he bought me lunch. That's the best friend I ever had in my entire life. I've known Tommy for a lot of years. I love that man. And when I got out the last time, February 8th, 2005, Carmine Colucci gets me some housing, got me a restaurant, and I go to work for him. And Zoe takes care of me again, like she always does. And one day, Tommy comes over and says, come on, you want to go shopping? I said, yeah, I want to buy a watch. I don't. So he says, he's got this girl over here. And he goes, this is my sister, Betty. I said, Tommy, I've known you 20 years. You never told me you had a sister. He said, I got 3 more, Frank, and I never brought them to you. I got revenge. I married her a year and a half later.
That's awesome. Okay, a few questions. These questions have come in from our viewers online. So we don't need long answers unless we need to. Let's try to keep them quick because we got a bunch of them. So before your arrest in the Hilda Krause murder, had you ever been arrested or picked up for anything else before that?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was when I was a kid, I wanted to go to the bullfights in California. So I went there, and I didn't like the bullfight at all. I was rooting for the bull to kill the matador, because I thought it was horrible what they do with an animal. So I start leaving, and I'm going to catch a bus to go back to L.A. And these guys pull up, and they said, you want to ride? I said, yeah. I said, where are you headed? I said, back to Hollywood. He said, come on, jump in. We get to the border. Woo! Shh! All the cops, FBI. Get out of the car. Got out of the car. They pulled that thing upon us, and they had pounds and pounds of marijuana. But these guys said, hey, look, we just picked the guy up. He's not with us. So the FBI guy says, yeah, go ahead, go. Go ahead and go. Problem was, I didn't go to jail. I did nothing. But on my record, it says I was guilty of smuggling.
Oh, wow.
I go, why can't I be guilty of smuggling? How does this shit happen to me?
Another question. If you could do one thing now that you couldn't do back then, what would it be?
I like to open up a shelter or a rescue. I love animals. Every time I got out, I had to have an animal. It's the only thing that would bring my sanity back,
Yeah.
because you get nothing but pure love, you know. Even when I come home now with my wife, who's the first one to greet me? Samson, my dog. You know, I love animals, but I would like to save as many of them as I can. I found feral cats and I feed them. I go out and I feed them. You know, when I was in there, locked up in a cell, listening to that door slam, you're locked in there. You can't go. It's just, I feel just like an animal when they're in a kennel. They're locked up. They have no freedom. I identify with them like the zookeeper.
Yeah.
The only time you get it out when they open up the door. Only time an animal gets out is when one of the attendants let them out. So I identify with animals, and I love them. And I want to save as many as I possibly can. And I feel that this is God's plan for me. And my Savior always is around to help me all the time. He guides me all the time. So that's really what I like to do. I like to save animals.
Okay, good. I want to direct this one to Jonathan and possibly Frank. It says, are any of the suspects left-handed?
That's a good question. I wish I
That is a
knew.
good question. I'll leave that one to Frank. Do you want to?
Go ahead.
None of the suspects that the police actually identified and pursued were left-handed. There were people that, we probably think it's more that people that knew what they were doing were the ones that were left-handed, meaning they knew how to kill and were probably more of the hired gun type left-handed killers.
Okay. This is something that's in my notes that I didn't get to. It's a question from another viewer. Are you going to be granted any restitution for your time served?
I hope so.
It's in the works, right?
It's in the works. But I got a great lawyer.
Yeah. Good. We could take maybe 2 questions in the room. If somebody would like to ask a question, we can have you come over to this microphone, or there will be a microphone there, and we can take a couple questions. Anybody? We've covered a lot of ground tonight, so if you don't, that's okay. You have one? Okay, come on up, Anne-Marie.
Oh, here comes the mob girl.
Oh, we have 2. Okay, hold on.
As his attorney, who is actually going for his exoneration compensation, Christina Wildeveld, I'm a private criminal defense attorney who, when Abby Silver called upon me as the only attorney in the state of Nevada who practices before the Nevada Pardons Board, she asked a favor of me to represent Frank. Having known the history of the LaPena case, I agreed to represent Frank before the Nevada Pardons Board and put together a 3-inch thick petition going through the entire history of his case. And yes, we are going for compensation for Frank. I have just recently had a settlement conference regarding that as of today. So hopefully we'll be able to follow up with Frank and get him some compensation for the years that he spent in time in prison.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. One more. Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Is she fabulous or what?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to know, how did they tie Weakland into you? I mean, how did they say that you two are connected? Like, why does he blame you? I mean, I know it's just, you're saying the state set him up.
There was a connection between Frank and Weakland. They knew
Okay.
each other. But what the police, there's actually evidence in the record to show that Weakland wasn't about to point the finger at Frank, but that Frank's name was suggested to Weakland by Weakland's attorney because he had been looking at the police reports, and the police had focused on Frank because of this strange Rosalie Marvin connection and that crazy theory they came up with. But it was really this crazy theory as opposed to actually looking at who the obvious suspects were.
Yeah. All right, so last thing tonight, I want to mention that Frank has been working on a book about his life. We've been here for an hour and a half. We've covered a lot of ground, but it represents probably 10% of what's in the book. There's a lot of great material in it. I've seen some early drafts of the book, and I encourage you all to get it when it comes out. You have a timetable, Frank?
I have some cards over here if you like some cards. It's called The Goddess and the Bell Captain.
And it's just about done. Is that right?
Huh?
It's just about finished.
We finished the writing. Now we got to do the editing and then put in the pictures. Then we just got to get it copyrighted and we're ready to go.
Excellent, excellent. So get ready for that down the road, not too far. And so I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And please,
I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight.
Yes. Round of applause for Frank and for Jonathan. Thank you all very much.
I have a new family here. I got a new family here. I got great kids. I got my Lindas. I got my buddy Greg, Anton, who's an old fart anyway. But I got a lot of great friends over here, and it's the best job I ever had. I love it, and the kids take all care of me. Little BB's always helping me with my stuff, and Sarah will always help me, especially with the technology that we still have, and I still don't know it. The computer goes this way. I go, help, kids, come here. Come over here.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Okay.
Bye.